and rehearsed this tons of times, we're going to really dive in and cover pretty much all of the visualizations that are standardly available, and actually some that are known as previews, so some of the ones that are kind of in beta mode that are inside of the product itself. And the way we're going to approach this is really clumping them together, right? Looking at how certain visualizations share aspects of which data types present themselves better in these types of visuals. So we're going to use report pages and have multiple visuals on them and explore them. And we're going to talk about really the format pane. So we're going to look at that here momentarily once we dive in. But I've got tons and tons. If there are questions, please don't hesitate to put those into the chat. Unfortunately, with the amount that we have covered today, I'm going to really keep track on the time on this. If we have time at the end, I'm going to try to cover those. But I'm planning on doing a blog after this, and I have an outro slide that will have all my contact details. So if you need to, if you want, you can ask me on Twitter or shoot me an email. But I am going to do a blog, and there I'll look to address those questions. So if you have something, put it on in there. We are going to capture that. But really, with no further ado, let's just dive right in. Let's bring up Power BI Desktop. So this is going to be demo intensive. I've already brought in the data, done the modeling, the transformation. So if you're here for that type of detailed information, that's not going to be covered. But just so you know, this is a small piece of pie that is part of our on-demand training where we cover all those elements. Here, it's about visualizations. And I know I'm hitting you real strong off the get-go. We have some right here, table and matrix views right in your face. Well, I'm going to go through. We're going to start with these, and I'm going to show some of the standard elements that can take you from the standard displays, as what we're seeing down here at the bottom. This is a table and a matrix, as if we were just bringing in the data and really not doing much, compared to the two that we see here. And you can go far beyond. The idea is just to show you the options that are available. So first and foremost, let's talk about the table. So the table here, fantastic way that we can visualize detailed data, give the users the access. Matrix, very similar as well. It's nice for grouping and either on column or row levels, which we can see here. And we're going to add in a couple more visualizations here that lend themselves nice to like text-based or tabular data. And all of these, they really are very effective when you lever some sort of filtering mechanism. Now, a filtering mechanism that's pretty common is going to be something like a slicer, but I'm going to show you a pretty neat new way that Power BI Desktop has recently introduced to do this within these visualizations. So first, let's hone in on the table itself. We can see what it looks like by standard, and I'm going to go through the options that we've done here. Primarily, we're going to live in this little paint, this roll brush here, known as the format well. When we expand this out, we're going to get a plethora of options. And really, the first ones I'm going to show you are going to be somewhat repeated throughout this demonstration, but I do find them as best practice and standards. And that's going to be here in the General tab, because obviously we're using these visualizations to present data, and we need to make sure that that can be read appropriately. So one of the first things you're always going to want to go to is text size. We can see the difference between what I have presented down here at the bottom, the basic one, and the one that I've introduced, where I've bumped this value up. Now, I really like auto size column width, and I'm going to show you how that takes effect here in a moment, but we can do other elements. We can see at the very bottom, I've got this total. Whether that's going to be needed or not, you can toggle that on and off. We can do other things, and with this second example that I'm about to show, we've really just taken and really dressed this up. So if anything, just the text and the table style, you can do a lot. So these are like pre-created templates. So we can see there's a couple different choices. I'm choosing alternating rows, but I can switch over to flashy rows, lots of different choices, which then we can build upon. So you can choose one that you prefer. I like the alternating rows, especially if you have multiple columns, because you can follow that record along from left to right very easily. So that's the one I've decided, but I can't add on to this. Even though I've got my theme, my style, if I wanted to incorporate more grids to really make those things pronounced, we can see I'm leveraging that in the matrix in the upper right, we can add that. So I can add vertical grids here. I can change the colors if I wanted to. We're actually doing this presentation here at our corporate headquarters in Jacksonville, so I wanted to keep like a Jacksonville Jaguars theme going on here with the black and the teal. I can incorporate that. And of course, as you're sampling and you're doing these things, if you want to go back, I always like to revert to default. Brings me back to where we started. And this is where I'm going to leave it. I like it. I don't want to incorporate the vertical grids, but I do like the horizontal. Now, other elements we can go under is also within the column headers. One thing in particular I like to show here, and that's going to be the Wordwrap option. Sometimes with these reports, these visuals, you're going to have multiple incorporated, and there might be a small little battle in regards to real estate, right? So if for any reason we need to bring this down, it needs to be scaled down, and we can see in this case, Wordwrap makes it nice because it's going to bring this down and add additional rows to account for this. So now we can keep this, we don't have to rely solely on the tooltip, which we can see is the pop out there, to tell us what's in that column. It's readily available. This is what it would look like if it was off. We can see tooltip does help, but the Wordwrap is great. Now, you're probably thinking, well, what about the values underneath that column? Can Wordwrap those? And actually, in its current iteration, in this version of the table visualization, you cannot. So a little bit odd, but of course, that was talked about. It was mentioned very easily and said, why can't we do this? The Power BI desktop team's already responded. There actually is a new version of the table in preview, which I actually have and we can look at, where it does now add in this section for values, there's an additional option now for word wrapping for the value level. So that has been added in. The other features that are part of the table, I'm going to wait till the end to show you, but it's pretty neat. So column headers, we've talked about that. I'm going to backtrack where I told you I was going to show you how the auto size column width happens. If I kind of enable this, it brings me back to, if I turn off the word wrap here, let me turn this off, and I'm going to use this auto size. So you can see that's how it enables. It brings us back, expanding it to the full length of the longest value that exists within that column. So that, I always like that, so it can bring me back to the beginning. Other fun things that we can achieve here, column formatting. We can see the right-hand side here, we have the sales amount. Now I'm creating this for my sales team, so this is a value that I want to be a little more pronounced. I want to add some accent to it. So in this case, I decided to just give it a different color. And we can really choose that when we see here, we have the option of all the columns available to me. So in this case, sales amount, and I can choose a color in question. But once that's done, we can actually toggle on and off what is truly going to be affected by this color. So in this case, all three are turned on and affected. But for my example, I just like it when the values themselves are solely the items that are being indicated here. So a couple quick keystrokes, and you can see a vast difference between the out-of-the-box, just dragging this in and using the data, versus formatting it as we see fit. Now this list, as you can see, you can scroll through. You've got all the details. Also, if you needed to, this information here, I can actually export this into a CSV. So by clicking this, it actually just brings me to a file explorer where I can save that information. Another element, and what we're going to see, as I mentioned, all of these really work nicely when we talk about some sort of filtering mechanism. We're going to see that shortly, how this list is going to amend. But the matrix, let me expand the standard one here so we can truly get a nice comparison of what it was before I did anything compared to what we have. So the information, surely it's present here at that bottom, but it really doesn't stand out. We're really not accenting anything of value. We can do a lot more here. So when we click on the visual, we're going to do a couple things. The first thing I did, once again, general, I upped my text size to make that more presentable. I also disabled the total column. So we can see here, there is a total column, and there's actually a row for total. I disabled this option. So this is something that you can toggle on and off very simply if you want to incorporate that or not. So for the nature of my information, I just wanted the rows. And naturally, we talked about it, text size and style. Just with these two, we're already moving forward in a good direction. I went with condensed, but once again, lots of different choices that you can manipulate and use. And then once that's chosen, you can still build upon that. And that's what I have done. I've gone ahead and added that vertical grid. I use this to increase the thickness. Originally, this is what it looked like right here. And I wanted to make it more pronounced, each quadrant itself. So I've gone ahead, added that thickness. We can add a little padding for each of the values inside of it, but there was satisfied. Now, in addition to this, we can actually go down to something here like in the subtotals. So we can see presently for each one of these, because I do have a hierarchy set up here. If we go back to the data well, I have my country and region. And currently the way it is displayed is it breaks out the hierarchy into its own separate column, which is what we're seeing here, and it's automatically applying subtotals to this. By default, this was just bolded with black text, but I wanted to go ahead and make those more pronounced. Hence, I went in here, chose a chose a color and incorporated that. And the reason why I chose this one is because I didn't want it to mesh or meld with the other colors that we're seeing in here. Now, interesting enough, the values that we can see have some color coordination here, but this is actually something that is not controlled inside of this format well. Where I actually go to achieve this, if we go back into the data fields here, the fields, I can hit the drop down for values for total sales, and there's this option for conditional formatting. So when I choose this, it brings up this screen, and by default, actually, this diverging tab button is unselected, but we can indicate a color for our lowest representation and our highest value here. So I've chosen red, green, and it's doing its best to show that blend going from one to the other, but you can be a little more explicit, and I want to get more of that stoplight feel, that red, yellow, green, and very importantly, if we take a look at the actual data here, we can see that the central and northeast regions for the US did not have sales for 2 years. Now, I can either allow the formatting to occur and treat these as zeros, so they'll actually be the minimum value in this scale and be that deepest shade of red that I've selected, or in my example, I cannot format it and leave those blank. I feel that that can be potentially, depending on how important you want to bring it to your sales team's attention, if you're saying, hey, no sales in this, what's going on? Well, then add it as a zero. You can add that in, or you can also apply a very specific color if you like. I decided to omit that, leave that blank, so that we can see it. But a big change, a big difference between what we see below and what we see above. Now, it should be noted that this also has a new preview mode version of the matrix, and we're going to bring that in, but both the table and the matrix, the neat little feature here is that filtering mechanism. So we're going to see that in a moment, but let's add a little bit more so we can truly see how that filtering can take effect. So here on the bottom, knowing that we're going to do some filtering later on, I do have a total down here. Now this represents my total sales and total profit. When we think about it from that perspective, those are very impactful numbers, and those are things that I want my sales team to see. Those are motivational numbers. And a great way to represent a solitary, singular value is going to be using the card visualization. So I can see that just here with this little 1, 2, 3. I can select that. We've got a new visual. And in this case, I'm going to go with my total sales. Let me bring that up. We'll go ahead and select that measure. And we can see the value presented. So I'm going to kind of bring this up, just a little window that brings me the information. And there's a couple things here. This is important, this is impactful, but we can add a little more to this. So once again, let's visit the format section. We can look within the data label, and there's a couple of choices here. One, we're talking about size. Now, in the other ones, I was increasing it, but in this case, I'm just going to reduce this. It still brings out, it's still there. If I want to make this a certain color display, I as well can do that. Another feature, though, we can see that this is rounding it to the millionth place. That's what's happening here. And in this display units, we can change that. So on auto, this is pretty much just doing the millions. You can see nothing's changed. But if I bring this to none, I'm getting the full value, the raw value. And I think this is a little bit better for my team. I want them to know exactly what's going on here, have the full figure. And if this happens to be something that's not monetary and there's multiple decimal places, just know that you can control that by just indicating a value here in the number of decimal places you'd like to display. So I've got this, I brought out the raw value, but I can do a little more. We can see here we have this is total sales. That's the category label, which we can see here. Now total sales is the right number, but I want something a little more motivational. So I'm actually going to disable that category label, and I'm going to add in my own label. But the way this is, it's going to be actually under the title area. So when I enable this, I have this text box, which I can now input, and I could put something like all-time sales. You know, it's kind of gray. Let's actually change that. Let's go black. Let's center that, and actually I'm going to pump this up, all-time sales. So real quick, simple changes, but now I've got this all-important information right there. And I mentioned another one, so let me just grab that in. We're going to go with profit. So let me add that so we have it. Oops, let's go here. All right, and I'm going to quickly I'm going to administer the same exact options that I just achieved. So you don't need to follow too much along with me if you're trying, but I'm going to change this. We're going to do none because I want to see the full value. I'm going to knock this down a smidgens. I'm going to disable the category label and then create my own title here again. And this one's going to be all-time profits. Let's make it pop a little more. Center that up. Let's increase the size. And I apologize if there's any perfectionists, if this is a little off-centered. In a final, you probably want to line that up a bit more, but we're going to keep churning here. So I've got these two items. The card, great way to show a all-important, a solitary figure that you want your end user to have there and consume. Now there's another variant. There's actually something called a multi-row card. Now this is something, it's somewhat similar to like a table itself, where we can display details of values that allow users to kind of move through them. So right now I'm going to create a display, a multi-row card display visualization, where we're getting a little more detail than what's currently in the table here about our products. So I'm going to kind of create this little scrolling area, all right, where we're going to be able to manipulate and go through this. So I'm going to get, you know, things like the product name, right about that, the name, the color, the class. For those of you who haven't done this, you know, just in case you're not aware, rather than just opening and expanding tables and choosing the fields, because there can be quite a lot, I'm simply just using the search feature to locate the fields that I would like. We're also going to bring in list price, product line, and lastly, of course, total sales. All right. So I've got everything I need here. So similar to the table, except we're expanding this out, a little more detail. But of course, we know we want to add something to the visuals, make this stand out a bit more. And the way we're going to achieve that, once again, go into here. In this case, I'm actually not going to change much in the data labels. I actually like the text itself. The size is fine to me. But we can go into something like here, like the card. And here we have the option to add some outlines. So you can give a little more definition to each one of these records in this way. So if I went with something like bottom only, it adds a line. Let me add a little bit of color though, so it's more identifiable. And then for me, I really like the show bar here. I don't like to keep it as gray. I'm going to give it a red color because it's another way just to clearly identify each individual record. Now this can easily be removed by just turning that off. But now we've got a nice scrollable list of the higher level detail of our products. So this actually is all of the text/tabular visuals we're going to do. But as I promised, what about the previews? I haven't done anything for a filtering mechanism. So as you can see, I actually have an additional table and an additional matrix, and they're listed as preview. If you're not aware on how to enable some of these these preview features, I'll include that in that blog post afterwards. It doesn't require a restart of the Power BI desktop, so I'm just not going to do that now. But since I have this selected, I'm going to switch over to the preview version. Of course, this is just in preview, so some of the things such as the scaling of the text isn't just there yet. But immediately, for those of you who have that photographic memory, if you're able to pay attention, the regions are no longer presented here because now we have this capability within a matrix to move down. We can navigate through hierarchies inside of this. There's a couple ways. I can just use the standard option of going to the next level, and what this is presenting to me is all of my regions only. We can see how the column has changed there. We can go back and expand all the way down, expand all of them to their next level, which is going to be our country and region. But notice, instead of creating an entirely separate column, it's actually just tabbed over. There's just a little bit of spacing, and this is where we can get back our subtotals because we have this hierarchy presented. And of course, whenever any hierarchy is available to be drilled through, we can always right-click and drill down a specific item. We also can enable clicking to drill down. But the other feature, the cool feature, is the filtering. So right now, we have our years and we have our countries. So if I click United States, I'm now affecting all of the visuals on my screen to show me, in this case, the table, all the products that were sold in the United States. We can see this value has changed here. I can get the details for everything that was sold. I can actually go and click the next segment. So this is United States for the year 2005. Really neat functionality, great filtering mechanism. This can also be leveraged if you want it for the table as well. So I'm not going to enable it, but it's simple enough. You just click on a product name in this example, and it's going to filter the rest of the elements. But there's something very important that should be noted here. As I'm filtering this, my all-time profits, as well as my all-time sales, they're changing too. Now that's correct, but it doesn't match what the title is of my card. This is a perfect example where we can show something that's known as editing interactions. Now notice it's up here at the top under the Format tab. We have this option, Edit Interactions. This is something that can be toggled on or off. I am going to leave it on for the duration of this webinar, and what it allows us to do is when we have a visualization selected, all other visualizations will be presented with two options. Do we want to allow this to be filtered by whatever content is selected here or not? So in my case, for these two cards, I'm going to say no. So regardless of what I'm doing, if I am going to leverage this new preview feature, these are going to remain as stated as the all-time sales and profit. While the other two, they'll filter down. So really important, something you want to take into account. Edit interactions can be extremely important depending on how you want to show this off to your consumers. So let me remove these filters. Let's go back to the basics. I'm also going to return this to the standard matrix. And now we get to move to the next tab. That's progress so far. So text, tabular data, great for filtering mechanisms. The bar and the columns are both going to be very similar. Obviously, we're talking about horizontal versus vertical, but these are going to be very useful for leveraging and visualizing categorical data. So in this first example, I'm actually using the stacked bar chart. I've already brought in a fair amount of information. If we highlight this and look what we've done, I've got my countries, we've got total sales, and something a little bit different, and that's going to be the temperature range in the legend. Now this is actually something where you can use a filtering mechanism. So when you have a legend, this is something that you can do. So if I brought this visual over to the previous pane and that was added, if I clicked hot, it would actually filter all of my data that was met into that category of temperature. So it's really neat. But there's definitely a couple of things we can do to improve upon this. If we go once again into the format area, we have the option for the legend. A couple things we can do here. I mean, if I've taken something and brought it into the legend field area, we probably don't want to disable this, but we can do a couple things, such as the title. For instance, cold, cool, hot, and warm. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Do I really need it to say temperature range here? We could either change the actual name or just get rid of it, which is what I'm going to do in this case. And also, since it's gone, this is being pushed over to the left-hand side. I'm actually going to center this up, bring it right to that area. Other things that we can achieve here, when we go over here to the y-axis, we can adjust the size and the positioning, in this case, of our countries. So if I wanted, depending on how we need to set up the display here, it may be beneficial to move this to one side or the other, and also bump up the size as well as the width. So you can add that width in between each one if you want to add a little bit of extra spacing between these individual bars themselves. Pardon me, meant to minimize this. As far as the x-axis goes, now we're talking about those monetary values at the bottom, we once again can go ahead and increase the size, and this is where we also have that option for display units. Now in these types of scenarios, depending on how much real estate you're going to give this visual, you might be able to go to none, but as you can see, it adds a bit of a clutter here. So in this case, I do recommend either doing auto or deciding where we want to kind of refine that down to. But you do have the options in the presentation in order to do that. Now another thing we can achieve, because we added in this legend, this capability of filtering these various values here, we can control what colors are represented. Now this might not always be impactful, but it is in particular for this example. One, we're talking about temperatures. So for the most part, we can represent these temperatures with more corresponding, more correct values. So cold, maybe I go with like a lighter, a chillier color. I'm going to actually take the one that we had here, and that's just going to be my cool, and I'm already feeling a bit better about this. It's more of an aesthetic, but we can. And another reason why this is critical is if we go with something for the data label section here. So by simply turning this on, we're going to see we got the relevant information. Because naturally, this is showing Australia, since we're using this bar, this stacked bar chart, it's building on each other, and it gives us the total summation, which is at the very end here, and we're nearing that 9 million mark. But we can see individually representative for, in this case, warm, hot, and cool, what are the values here. Now you might note that some of these smaller values we aren't capable of actually displaying because of the size. Unfortunately, the smallest text size you can do here is 8, but at the same time, we talked about making this clear and transparent. If we make this smaller and smaller, it's going to take away. So in this example, I'm going to leave it at 9. You'll notice as we expand this out, the refs do come into play, but this is also a great important section where we can look at what's known as tooltips. So even though I don't see this data label, it's very simple and easy to hover over this and get that relevant information. So also, since we're talking about tooltips, you are capable of adding in values for your end users to see without it being actually part of the visualization. So if we go back into this field area, we're going to see that we have this section here for tooltips. So all I need to do is find some sort of measure that I would like to be included. And notice, I use the word measure because that is important. That is actually going to be critical and part of this. So what I'm going to add into here is total, actually let's go with profit. I'm going to drag that down into the tooltips, and I'm going to go with total cost as well. So we got total sales, total cost, and profit, and you'll see nothing's changed in my visualization, but as I hover over, now these values are presented to me. Now tooltips can be extremely powerful. I feel like these are some of the more underestimated elements within visuals, and I'm going to give you a little sneak peek of using a DAX expression to add, because as I mentioned, if I wanted to do a tooltip, it needs to be a measure. So we've already seen the United States has various different regions. If I wanted that to be presented into this tooltip, how would I do that? Because region is just a list of values. It's not a measure. And I'm going to show how that can be taken care of. But now we've got some great additions to this visual. We've added those data labels. There is other ways we can represent this rather than them being stacked on each other. I can simply copy and paste this just here. So Control-C and Control-V does work in case you didn't know. And we can switch this over to a clustered. Oops, I need to actually highlight this. So let's select this appropriately and click the clustered bar chart. So we're seeing the same information. The data labels are somewhat more represented. This might be a better example where we can actually dive into the data labels. And in this case, I actually do prefer reducing the size of this so it fits a bit more nicely. But now it's individualized. Now it's a bit more, we can see more values are being represented by these data labels. So same exact visualization, do we need it stacked or is cluster making sense? Another way also that is pretty interesting that we can do with this is going to be the 100% stacked bar. So similar to the first one where we're stacking elements, but the bar is going to consume the entire length of the visual, and we're going to have percentages of amounts that are going to be consuming that. So we're going to go ahead and let's grab this, bring this over, expand it, and I'm going to grab here. Let's make sure we have this selected. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and get total sales. All right. Range for my temperature. This is going to go down into the legend. And then lastly, we're going to absolutely grab the country. Why are you hiding? There we go. And country. So another way to visualize this, we can notice because I didn't copy and paste, this is returned back to the default values here for the temperature range. Once again, though, something important, data labels, because of the size, because this is a 100% chart, though, these areas are going to be far more filled in, so it's going to represent this far more easily. And this is also potential where we can add in some tooltips here to get much more visibility. So 3 different ways going horizontally to represent some categorical data. Of course, we can go the other direction, too. We can go ahead and add in some elements in regards to, in this case, I'm switching it up. Instead of temperature range, we're actually going to go with age breakdown, another measure that I have created. But now, here we have, this is going to be our stacked column chart. We can do a couple additional things. One, I'm going to manipulate some elements here for the tooltips, but we're also going to clean this up a little bit. So this is default. I haven't done anything. In this case, so we are seeing that there is a hierarchy here. So we have our year and our month. But as I dive into this, we can, of course, manipulate the legend, which I actually have. I've renamed it. This was known as age breakdown. I renamed it to age. I'm going to keep that. I've centered it, and I've upped the text size. Always important, always critical. Now, under x-axis for this, there's actually going to be something a little bit different and a little bit new here. This is going to be, we have this option for type, and really this is going to control what options we have available within this x-axis. And when we say continuous or categorical, what we're saying is continuous is really when you have a set of values that have a ton of distinct values in there. So if it's a data set with a ton of distinct values and be hard to display, you have these additional options where you can have a start and end, so you can scale it down. You can see there's other elements down here for how you want to display those values. But for ours, we have a set number of distinct values. It's a specific set. So I can switch this over to categorical. It does reduce what's available to me within that x-axis, but there are choices. So depending on what we choose here for our values, this can be very important. So now that I have this hierarchy, I can go ahead and choose this option to expand down one level. So this is really important. Now by default, under this x-axis, there is this option here that says concatenate labels. Now this is currently off. By default, it actually is on, and this is what it looks like, just so you have an idea. Where we've gone ahead and taken both the year and the month, and they're concatenated together. And you can see where one, it's can be a little bit much, but by not concatenating in this example, by turning this off, I feel like you get a better representation of this. So depending, and this is going to be specific to the hierarchies and as you're drilling down, but something that can be supremely helpful here. So I'm going to bring this back up to the top level. We can see also under the y-axis, if we continue down, these are familiar fields, but we can adjust things. This is where we're talking about the monetary values here. Do we want it on the left and the right? Do we want to go from a specific range, only from 0 to 4 million? We can exclude that. We can change color and, of course, text sizes. Now, we do, as well as the legend, as with other things, for the data colors, we can change the representation of this. Or, when we turn this on, just note that we have this capability of changing orientation. So display units we're familiar with. We like what we're seeing here with it being summarized to the millions. But if we wanted, we could change this from horizontal to vertical. Now, it's truly not necessary in this example. I'm actually going to go with horizontal. It obviously makes far more sense, but you can control this. And we're going to see how that has an impact here in a moment. So we have the data labels. There is one other little piece of this that I like to show, but it's almost, I've seen this actually used for more harm than good, but potentially you have this option for a plot area. And in this case, you can actually add an image which will be embedded in the background of this column chart, and you can, as you can see, dictate how or less, more or less transparency for it. But of course, when we think about this, it's all about the values, the figures, the display, so you don't want to incorporate anything that's going to take away from that. You can definitely overdo it by adding an image here. Now using the exact same data set, I'm just going to show similar to what we were doing with the bar charts. I can go ahead, copy. Now I'm going to paste. And it should be noted, similar to the other elements, if we wanted, we could export this data into a CSV. And there is a sorting aspect to it, but I'm going to go from, instead of this stacked, we're going to go with a cluster. So here's a prime example where horizontal actually isn't going to do me any good. So even though we are doing columns, this is where we can go into the display, go down to the data labels, and let's switch this orientation, and this makes it significantly better. And I'm using the auto. What's happening here is you can see the position is set there. You can choose, do I want it inside the end? So it kind of forces that, but some of the smaller values, now this one's completely gone. On others, I like the auto because we can see it's doing inside on the end and then outside on the other ones that has the room. If we needed to, we could bump this text size up, but I'm pretty satisfied with what I have. But a prime example where this makes sense to change it over to vertical. Now the last one we have here is similar to the bars, is going to be the 100% stacked. So I can copy, we can paste. I'm going to move this over, give myself a little more room here. Let's shrink this up, slide her in. We're going to switch this over to the stacked column. Once again, there's a good concept here about reverting this back down to horizontal. So let's swing this over, oops, here. Far more visible, far more entertaining here, and far more valuable. So just 3 different visualizations, same data set, but you can definitely tell how it's going to be differently viewed on the consumers. So, and once again, since there are legends here, as we select one of these, the rest will be filtered accordingly. So this will be one of those elements. Do we want to edit the interactions here, yes or no? So very important, good to see. The last one that I'm going to include in this part is actually going to be the option that's known as the funnel. So this is a pretty neat one, and I probably don't want to change the one I have. I'm actually going to bring in a new one here. Let's go grab funnel. And this is really effective when you want to show or display some sort of workflow. So here, I'm going to go ahead and bring in, we're going to go once again with the range of the temperature. All right. Go ahead and grab the total sales and the total quantity this time. So we're going to leverage a new option in the field well here. It decides to load up. All right. Total sales, there we go. And total quantity. So in this case, when I click this, or I could drag this down, but it's going to go into the color saturation, which is pretty interesting, similar to what we saw with the conditional formatting where it had that graded scale moving from one shade to another. This is going to keep the one color and make it more transparent or less transparent. Now the idea behind this chart though, I'm going to use this option. So this ellipsis also gives us the options to sort by one of the specific values we have here. So I'm going to sort by the total sales. So the highest amount for warm weather, it's going to be at the top. That represents the highest, 100%. And we can see, cool, what percentage of warm is this meeting? And then down the line. So cold is going to be compared to warm and then also compared to the one immediately previous to it down the line. This can be really effective when you're looking at a workflow. For instance, a total list at the very top of all of the clients that you want to contact. The second would be the number who actually have been contacted. And third, maybe the amount they're in the final stages of purchasing. But it can be really neat, pretty effective. The similar styles of filters are going to be available to this. The formatting options are going to be available. Now the next section, I told you we were going to keep breezing. We're going to keep pushing strong here. Proportional charts. Now you can see these are somewhat bland ones. Everybody knows it's the pie chart and the donut chart. There is some differences you can see right away, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time. It's one, if you need to use a pie or you need to use a donut, there's one field in particular that I want to bring out, and that's going to be presented under the detail labels. And this is where you can choose, as we can see, United States. It's basically just giving me the categories. So how do I tell the difference without hovering over, without using the tooltip, you know, the difference between these two pieces of the pie? We want to easily understand this. So you can choose what you want to include here. So for me, I like going with the category and the value. We could as well have added in multiple, so there's 3 different here. We can go with percent, or we can add them all. All gets a little bit cluttered, but this makes it supremely more advantageous when looking at it. But there's one here for proportional that I really like, and this is going to be the tree map. So the tree map is pretty cool here. So this is going to be a bit larger visualization. I always like to make and expand this one a bit more. So let's actually, let me make this a little quicker so we can just do this. We're going to use this data. I'm going to copy and paste it over. Always lovely when you can do that. I am going to boom this, and let's go ahead and tree map it. So one big pane, like I always think of this like a blanket made of patches, right? You can see which one is representative in the largest patch. But there's something really neat I want to show you here. In this case, we can actually add a hierarchy. So I do have country. In this case, I'm going to add region in here. And we have 2 choices. You can see it's automatically brought region into the details, which now United States, which has multiple regions, it's broken it into micro patches, you can think. But oddly enough, Southwest and Northwest, those aren't the only categories. If we slowly hover over this, there's Southeast. It's in there. Oh yeah, trust me. The rest are actually all squished in here because there's such a vast difference in the values here that it doesn't represent that nicely. So what we can do is we can actually bring this up into the group, and now we have the full capability of leveraging hierarchy where you can expand this, go to the next level, and we can see now we have Southwest, Northwest. I could go again and go all the way down, and now we have United States Northwest, so we can see this. It's pretty neat. But this is where I want to show an awesome example of tooltips. So I know that there's regions here. We know that. We've already seen it. So you think, well, let me just drag this region down right into the tooltips, right? Well, what we see is, and it automatically shows us, it's saying first region. So when I hover over, now it just says central. That's not going to be too beneficial or helpful in this regard. I can go and look and see what options I have. Maybe the counts. We can see a number. Sure, this is somewhat beneficial. Now I can see when I hover over this, there's 5 regions. Okay. But this is where we can leverage and create a list using a DAX expression to make this pop a little more. So in my measures table, I created something called subcategories. Now this was not solely me. Devin Knight actually has a blog on this, and the gentleman presenting next week, Dustin Ryan, he actually created the subcategories and more, which I'm going to show. But just so you can see this, this is the formula here. It's going to be on the blog. But if I drag this down into the tooltip, now we've got the number 5 because it's doing the count, and I've got a concatenated list of those actual regions. And just in case, if you're going to leverage this, you might be working with data sets where that's hierarchy, maybe something like product category and product subcategory, where there could be a ton of values here. You might not want that to completely populate. So this more advanced expression, which we're seeing right here, is going to go ahead and effectively look at the amount that is included in the regions, do a count, and if that value is greater than 3, we're going to append, or actually it's 3 or greater, we're going to add in a literal value of and more, and only show the top 3. So it's a pretty neat expression. I'll also include that one. When we drag this down here, this tooltip, once again, we can see subcategories, which represents all 5, but subcategories and more. Gives us me the first 3, and it tells me there's more. Because yes, I want them to understand there's some regions here, but I don't want the entire list populated. They have the drill down capabilities, so that can absolutely be achieved by they themselves. So a pretty cool, neat thing, a way that you can, as I mentioned, pretty underestimated is the tooltips. You can do a lot of really neat things with that. Now the next one, trend. We're just chugging along. I want to make sure we save enough time because maps is where we want to get to. So I may skip a couple of these, but I'm definitely going to hit some important ones. Okay, so let's go here with, I've already populated this line chart. I've got some values. It's not supremely impactful, but I have created a hierarchy here which allows users to drill into it. So if I enable this drill into, one thing that I always like to point out though is as we're moving through, I picked the year 2007. I'm going to pick quarter 2. Now we have our various, our months. I can choose May. One thing if you want, so you can have this, you can actually control the range of what's being displayed here. So actually, when we go down into the axis itself, we can see that there's an option here where we can choose a start and end date. So I can actually go in here, choose the map. Let's say we want to start from May 1st. That year is going to be 2007. And I want to go to May 15th, 2007. Now I have far more control over what's actually being shown in this visual. And there are a bunch of data points here. One of the coolest things that we've seen so far, which I always enjoy when it can be done, when it's not too much of a clutter, is of course turning on those data labels. So we can see it's added those into these individual data points. But you might notice I did 15 days. There's not 15 data labels here. And that is because it's controlled by something here that we can see that's called density. It's hiding from me. Oh, pardon me. If I pick data labels, that'll be correct. So we've got this label density area. So in this case, if I wanted, of course, if we have more real estate, those data labels come into play. But we can actually, if we're limited to this, actually manually improve or pump up the density of how many labels are going to be presented. So you can up this by percentage. It's one way to add those in. But a pretty neat way you can do this to visualize it and scope it down. So as people reach down to this level, it's going to be specified into that date range. Now in this category, we also do have an area chart as well as a stacked area chart. So let me bring that in really quickly. We're going to kind of zoom through this one. There's one point in particular that I want to show for this that's very important. We can go here. Let's go ahead and we got profit margin. And the point is it's behind this measure. So we've got profit margin. I'm going to bring in month. Oops. Let me spell that right. We've got month. And I'm also going to do, my legend is actually going to be the age breakdown here. But it's put in the access. Let me just drag this down, legend. So a pretty neat, fun display here. Oops, let me kind of give it a little more real estate that we can see. And of course, there are loads of things we can do here in the display area. We know already about the legend, how we can eliminate that title if we wanted to. We can, center it if we needed to. So that's what I'm going to do. A lot of choices accessible, but we're already familiar with this. I want to show now, I'm going to copy this. So profit margin, if we look on the left, those values, there's very little differences when we talk about this, when we see these values. So when I copy and I paste this, and I go to leverage here, and we're going to do this as a stacked area chart, notice this. It really doesn't show itself well. So what we're seeing here is the green, which is 41%, and the 41. So these are all pretty much the same, and they're just stacked on top of each other. And this is showing the total amount of percentage, not an effective visualization. So this is an example where you have to be careful on what measure you're using per visualization. So in this case, rather than profit margin, I'm going to go ahead and put in profit here. This is going to be far better for me. I'm going to swap those out. And we can see this breakdown significantly more improved. It gives us that value. And once again, we've got filters. So 55 plus only for my May 1st to May 15th for 2007. We can see how that adjusts. Potentially something for edit interactions. So pretty neat, pretty fun. Now keep the idea of profit margin, what we just did here for that stacked area chart, remember that. Because we're about to achieve something here. I'm going to approach the combo. I'm only going to show 2 in this example. But I'm using profit margin here. If we select this, I'm using profit margin as well as, it's actually all set up the same. And it doesn't really make sense. There's not much deviation. It's stacking on each other. But that doesn't mean we can't use this. This is actually the line and stack column. I haven't added the line metric in. But we already know that the line appropriately will display that margin. So now we can do them both together. So rather than including in here the column value as profit margin, I'm actually going to do total sales, which we've seen before. And then for profit margin, we have this additional area where we can drop it down for the line value. So now we have this capability of showing both of these. So on the right-hand side of that y-axis, we've got the percentages, which is small different margins here. And then for the columns, we're able to represent that bigger degree, which shows those changes. And of course, we can do this either clustered or we can do this as well, which we just saw in the stacked, but very interesting. And another way that you can now combine what we've already done together when you want more than one metric to be shown, more than one measure to be displayed here. Now the next one I'm going to show, I'm going to cut one of these out. Like I said, we have all this online, but this one is pretty neat. I very much enjoy this. We're going to talk about the scatter chart. So let me go ahead. I'm going to actually make this be the entirety of this. And let's bring in some metrics. And this is good. You can do 3 different kind of metrics here. So I'm going to grab in total sales. All right. We're going to go ahead and grab total cost. Okay. We're also going to grab profit. And profit's going to go somewhere interesting. You see it goes down to size. It's kind of one of the first times we're using that. Also need to, let me add in months. We have this over time here. Hide in front of me. Go into the details. And we need a legend. So what are we going to add into the legend? We actually already have, let's go with, we're going to go with temperature range actually. I was going to do age breakdown, but we're going to go with temperature for our legend. So once again, we know we have the filters for the legend if we want to eliminate the title, but there's one more thing that we're going to do here. So what we have, currently we have the month is listed in the details. But if I bring this down to the play axis, this is going to change a little bit. So we have the visualization, the left hand total cost, the right, the x-axis is going to be that total sales. And when we hover over this, currently we can see this is the month of December. We can see the value for this. Cool. And we can see all of those things via the tooltips. We have this play button now. So now we can move through all of this information and see by month how this goes through. Now, unfortunately, there's currently no way that you can slow this piece down. Of course, you can pause it. But one thing that's pretty interesting is you can click one of these data points, and now that's focused. It's going to show me as it's moving through its various stages through the month, so as it's changing. And of course, you can control click if you wanted to, and you can actually have multiple of these being tracked if you wanted. So another way that this can be achieved. A pretty neat thing. I love the play access. Definitely when you have like 3 metrics you want to gather together and you can play it over time, it's really awesome. It tells a great story here. So the last one, I wanted to make sure I save some time. It's not much, but this is going to be all about geographical data. And the key and the focus here, though, is 1, this is all going to be kind of accessing the internet, and 2, we need the data to be as minimal as far as ambiguity goes. We need it to be as detailed as possible here, right? We can't just add in a city because multiple cities, multiple states, things such as that. So I actually have added in a city-state column where I concatenated it. But just think geographical, minimize ambiguity here. So the ones that we have natively available are going to be map, this option here. I'll bring that in. And we actually have a shape map. And the way this is going to work, I'm just going to kind of fly through these. Let me actually highlight this so we can actually populate it. But the map, we can go with city-state, and I've created, as I mentioned, this. And if you're unfamiliar why this has a globe next to it, it's because for this field, under this modeling ribbon, I've actually specified a category for this. Traditionally, this will be unknown, but if you have this geographical data, you can specify city, region, postal code. There's a ton of different options under this that you can choose from. So I've gone ahead, I specified this and created this. So I've got my city-states. I'm going to go with, it's populating there, total sales. That's what I mentioned, it's connected to the internet. And we can go ahead and I'm going to go age breakdown. This should go into my legend. So something that we're familiar with, something that we can see. A lot of times I do like to bring this into the view where we have this kind of focus mode. But now we have this capability where we can zoom in and see all these various elements, and it's done by city. Very fun, very exciting. A couple quick things on the filter side. Map controls, I actually like to turn off auto zoom. And what that does is if I did anything here, any change, if I changed the colors of my legend, it would automatically zoom back out. So something I always do. You can enable category labels, but it gets a little bit clouded here if we see a lot of stuff. So you just got to pick and choose these filters correctly, but for geographical data, there's some awesome native things readily available. Now where this has a nice detail, we also have the option for a fill map. And this is going to take on those elements similar to the waterfall or when we use that conditional formatting, where it's going to use shades of a color to represent this information. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go province code, just a field I have here. And it's going to build that already. And I'm also going to grab my total sales. So we can see that there. It's all the same hue, but as soon as I add in total sales to the saturation, we can see how that amends. This also has this capability for auto zooming. Highly recommend turning that off. And there's other ones there too. Now there are two in preview that I have enabled. That's what we're seeing here. This is known as the fill map. Oh, sorry, it's hiding from me. I have the ArcGIS and yes, the shape map. Those are the two that are in preview mode that can also be enabled. Unfortunately, I'm going to skip past the shape map. It's very similar to the fill map, except you can actually upload JSON files and specify what visual you want to see. But lastly, I want to bring in this one known as the ArcGIS. Pretty powerful, and it has some pre-created, somewhat like templates for this. So I'm going to quickly bring this one in. We're running a little shy on time, but I'm going to go city-state, bring in this fun stuff. City-state, what else do I want to add in here? We're going to go with total sales, and it's already kind of hooking into the internet as we can see here, so it's kind of slowing down a bit while it's doing that. But we can see right away, and this one is interesting because of the way you can edit this. You actually don't have many options when it comes to the formatting area. It looks somewhat similar to the first one we displayed, but what we can do here is we can actually hit the ellipsis, hit the edit option, which is going to bring it into focus mode, and now I've got a bunch of different choices that I can pick from, and these are really cool, really neat. We can go into the base map. Do I want it to show the darker version? Do I want actually street level detail? You can choose any of these to go with. Not only that, we can choose a theme. This is currently the size, so my total sales is dictating the proportions here, but I could do a heat index actually rather if I wanted to. So there's really neat choices. You can drop in pins if you want to signify a specific location, and the reference layer, this is what I meant where they have some pre-created information here. So 2016 USA average household, I've got my metrics already here represented in the way it is, but now US, so I've got all this information. So as well as my circular dots which represent the total sales, we actually can click at any of these regions and we can actually find the household median income. A really neat feature. Once again, this is in preview mode, but it can be enabled. It works very nicely. And I really enjoy this when it comes to geographical. Woo. Now I know that was a bit of a whirlwind. We're getting here to the close mark, so I wanted to make sure. I don't have anything there. As I said, if there's any questions, I'll address those. I did want to bring up my contact information though. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you got to see some visualizations that you did not. hopefully the expert who happened to stay throughout and learn something there. But there's a lot in here, and a lot of people forego the formatting tab and all the options that are available and tooltips, tooltips, tooltips. Let me bring this up here so you have my contact information, so you can kind of keep this as a note. It has my blog, my Twitter, my email. So if you need to, if you have something specific, you can go right to me directly through those options. Like I said, I am going to be writing a blog on this, answering any and all questions. I did put in another element here, blog.pragmaticworks.com. We actually have a ton of free content. So if this is the first webinar you've been to, highly doubtful. I know there's a lot of you that come all the time, and we really appreciate it. But a lot of our content we have on there. Devin Knight in particular goes through, he's gone through like 40, 45, maybe even 50 now of the custom visualizations, something that we didn't cover in this webinar, but these user-made and Microsoft team created visualizations beyond what's in this display. So I highly recommend going there, and this was just a small drop in the bucket for what we have in on-demand training. You saw a sneak peek of our Power BI desktop class, but that class has about 11, 12 more hours inside of just that one class. So a lot of helpful items here. Let me bring back Erica so she can add a little more details about this webinar, but I'll leave this up so you guys can keep that information.
All right, thank you so much, Manuel, and thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar on Power BI. For those of you who have asked about access to this webinar, we do record all of our training sessions, and we send a link to the video in a follow-up email tomorrow. So expect that, or you could check our website, and the video will be available on our website later today. So feel free to check out our free offerings again on our website, pragmaticworks.com, and be sure to join us next week for another free webinar on Power BI Premium. Thanks, everyone.